The telegram fluttered in Rebecca O'Malley's trembling hands as she stood at the edge of town, the distant silhouette of mountains framing her escape. Wyoming Territory, 1879, a place far enough from Boston that her husband would never find her, assuming he even bothered to look for his property after what she'd done. Rebecca adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders, wincing as the fabric brushed against the yellowing bruises on her collarbone. The late autumn wind whipped through Sweetwater Junction, carrying dust that stung her eyes, or perhaps those were tears. She couldn't afford tears anymore. Not after 6 months of marriage to Harold Blackstone, a man whose gentle courtship letters had concealed a monster with fists like hammers and a voice that could shatter glass. The stagecoach had deposited her at this remote outpost just minutes ago, leaving her alone with her single carpet bag and the desperate hope that the advertisement she'd answered would lead to something anything better than what she'd fled. Miss O'Malley. A weathered woman with kind eyes approached. "I'm Martha Wilson. I run the general store. Mr. Grant asked me to fetch you when you arrived." "Yes, that's me." Rebecca clutched her bag tighter. "Is Mr. Grant, is he here?" Martha's smile was reassuring. "He's finishing up at his ranch. Asked me to get you settled at the boarding house until tomorrow. Said to tell you there's no rush on anything." No rush. The words nearly made Rebecca collapse with relief. Harold had always been rushing her to make decisions, rushing her to please him, rushing her with his fists when she wasn't quick enough. The boarding house was clean but sparse, with a narrow bed and faded quilt that seemed luxurious after 3 days of travel. Rebecca sat at the small vanity mirror, studying her reflection. 22 years old, and she barely recognized herself. The bruise near her temple was fading to a sickly yellow, but the haunted look in her eyes remained. What would this Mr. Grant think when he saw her? Would he reject her immediately, send her away? The advertisement had been simple. Wyoming rancher seeks honest, hardworking wife, good treatment promised, comfortable home. References available. It was the good treatment that had caught her eye as she'd thumbed through the newspaper in the safe house where a sympathetic neighbor had hidden her. The references available had sealed her decision. She'd written immediately, and Benjamin Grant's response had come quickly, his handwriting steady and clear, enclosing train fare and simple instructions. Rebecca slept fitfully that night, waking to every creak and settling of the boarding house, certain that Harold had somehow found her. By morning, she was exhausted but determined to present herself with whatever dignity she could muster. Martha arrived after breakfast with a borrowed dress that fit Rebecca better than her traveling clothes. "Ben's a good man," Martha said as she helped Rebecca with her hair. "Quiet type. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. Never heard him raise his voice to man nor beast. People can be different behind closed doors," Rebecca murmured. Martha's hands paused. "That they can, but I've known Benjamin Grant since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father was a shouter and worse. Ben swore he'd never be like that." A wagon pulled up outside the boarding house before Rebecca could respond. Through the window, she caught sight of broad shoulders and a worn Stetson as a tall man climbed down. "That's him," Martha said. "Ready." Rebecca wasn't ready, not remotely, but she'd come too far to turn back now. Benjamin Grant filled the doorway of the boarding house parlor, hat in hand. His face was sun-browned and weather-lined, but younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30. His eyes, a startling clear blue, widened slightly at the sight of her, then narrowed as they took in the fading bruise at her temple. "Miss O'Malley." His voice was deep but soft, as if he was consciously keeping it gentle. "I'm Benjamin Grant. Welcome to Sweetwater Junction." Rebecca's practiced greeting caught in her throat. She managed a nod and a whispered, "Mr. Grant." "Ben," he corrected, still standing at a respectful distance. "If you need more time to rest after your journey, I understand. There's no rush to head out to the ranch today." There it was again, no rush. "I'm recovered enough, thank you," she said, finding her voice. "I'd like to see the place I might call home if you're willing to have me." Something in his expression softened. "I'll have you, Miss O'Malley, if you'll have me, but that's not a decision for today. First, let's get you out to the ranch, show you what you'd be getting into." The ride out of town was quiet but not uncomfortably so. Benjamin Grant seemed content to let silence rest between them, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the area. His ranch, the Double G, lay nestled against rolling hills with distant mountains forming a dramatic backdrop. It wasn't grand, but it was well kept, a solidly built two-story house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and cattle grazing in the distance. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they approached, an older man emerged from the barn. "That's Hank," Benjamin explained. "He's been with the ranch since my father's time. There's also Mrs. Cooper, who comes in 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, and 2 hands who work the herd." Rebecca nodded, taking it all in. It was much larger than she'd expected from his modest letters. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's hard work," he replied. "Winters are harsh, spring brings flooding, summer's dry. And there's always something trying to eat the profits: wolves, rustlers, or bankers." His frankness was refreshing after Harold's false promises. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Grant Ben." He helped her down from the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary. "I reckon you aren't, coming all this way on your own." The interior of the house surprised her: polished wood floors, simple but good furniture, and shelves lined with books. It was clean and well organized, with touches that spoke of care: a crocheted blanket over the back of a chair, curtains at the windows, a vase of late wildflowers on the dining table. "Mrs. Cooper's touch," Ben explained, seeing her glance at the flowers. "She tries to civilize me when she can." Rebecca smiled despite herself. "She's doing a fine job." He showed her the kitchen with its cast-iron stove and pump sink, the dining room, the parlor with its fireplace, and then upstairs to what would be her room, a spacious bedroom with a large window overlooking the mountains. "My room is down the hall," he said, gesturing vaguely. "There are 2 other bedrooms if, well, for the future." A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. They returned downstairs, and Ben offered her coffee, which she accepted. As they sat at the kitchen table, a comfortable distance apart, he studied her with those clear eyes. "Miss O'Malley," he began carefully, "I need to be honest with you. I'm looking for a partner, not a servant. This would be your home too, if you choose to stay. I don't expect you to work yourself to death or to submit to anything that brings you discomfort." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her cup. "Why me? Your advertisement must have received many responses." "It did," he acknowledged, "but your letter showed intelligence and honesty. You didn't pretend to be something you weren't." "I told you very little about myself," she pointed out. Ben's expression remained steady. "You told me enough. You said you were seeking safety and a fresh start, that you valued kindness above wealth. That you weren't afraid of isolation but couldn't abide cruelty." He paused. I recognized something in those words. Rebecca looked away. "The bruise, you've been staring at it since we met." "Not staring," he corrected gently, recognizing my mother had similar marks often. Understanding bloomed between them, a fragile thread of shared experience. "I left a husband in Boston," Rebecca said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "We're not divorced, I simply fled. If that makes me unacceptable, it doesn't," Ben interrupted, his voice still soft but firm. "What would make you unacceptable is if you were cruel or dishonest. The rest is just circumstance." "He might come looking for me." Ben's face hardened slightly, the only sign of anger she'd seen from him. "Let him try." They talked through the afternoon, the awkwardness gradually giving way to cautious comfort. Ben explained the rhythms of ranch life, his hopes for expanding his herd, the challenges they faced. Rebecca shared what skills she brought: her education, her ability with numbers, her experience keeping house. They both carefully avoided deeper personal revelations, as if by unspoken agreement. As evening approached, Ben cleared his throat. "I thought, if you're agreeable, you might stay a week. Get to know the place, the work, see if it suits you. You'd stay here, of course, but with no obligations. At week's end, you decide. If it's not what you want, I'll take you back to town and see you safely on the next stage with enough money to get wherever you wish to go." Rebecca considered his offer. A week seemed both too long and too short to determine the course of her life. Yet what choice did she have? Return east with no money and the constant fear of Harold finding her, Accept the first offer she received out west. That seems fair, she said finally. Though I wouldn't want to be a burden. You won't be, he assured her. Mrs. Cooper will be here tomorrow and the next day. She can show you around, explain how things work. I won't ask anything of you this first week except that you be honest about whether this life could suit you. That night, in the clean, comfortable bedroom that might become hers permanently, Rebecca lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of horses, the creak of the house as it settled. From down the hall, she could hear Ben moving about, then the soft closing of his door. She thought of Harold, his handsome face twisted in rage, his elegant hands formed into fists. She remembered his voice rising from honeyed charm to thunderous rage in moments. How he'd gone from gently courting the daughter of a prosperous merchant to treating her as property once the marriage papers were signed. Benjamin Grant was nothing like Harold in appearance or manner. Where Harold was polished and urbane, Ben was rugged and straightforward. Where Harold's emotions flashed like summer lightning, Ben seemed steady as the mountains on the horizon. But men could change. Rebecca had learned that lesson painfully. Morning brought the aroma of coffee and bacon. Rebecca dressed carefully in one of her 2 serviceable dresses and made her way downstairs to find Ben at the stove. I'm not much of a cook, he apologized, sliding eggs onto a plate, but I can manage breakfast. Mrs. Cooper will be here mid-morning. Rebecca ate hungrily, realizing she'd had little appetite for days. Ben watched with approval before excusing himself to tend to the morning chores. Feel free to explore, he said. The property is yours to wander. Just stay clear of the bull's pasture northeast corner marked with red posts. Left alone, Rebecca did explore first the house, noting its solid construction and thoughtful design. There were signs of a woman's touch from long ago, a sampler on the wall, a collection of china in a cabinet, but also the unmistakable evidence that a bachelor had lived here for years. She was in the small study, examining the bookshelves with surprise and pleasure at the unexpected titles, when Mrs. Cooper arrived. The housekeeper was a brisk, friendly woman in her 50s who looked Rebecca over with frank curiosity. So you're the one who answered Ben's advertisement, she said without preamble. Got more spirit than the last one, I can see that already. There were others, Rebecca asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Cooper snorted. 2 others came to visit. First one took one look at the isolation and was back on the stage before sundown. Second stayed 3 days, but she and Ben circled each other like wary cats. No harmony there. She hung her shawl on a peg. You've got a different look about you. What kind of look? Rebecca asked cautiously. The older woman's eyes softened. Like someone who's seen the bottom of the well and is mighty grateful to be climbing out. She patted Rebecca's arm. Come on then, let me show you how this household runs. The day passed quickly as Mrs. Cooper introduced Rebecca to the workings of the ranch house where supplies were kept, how Ben preferred things arranged, which tasks were most pressing. To Rebecca's surprise, the housekeeper treated her not as a prospective bride to be evaluated, but as the future mistress of the house being properly briefed. Ben's a good man, Mrs. Cooper said as they prepared dinner together. Quiet, sometimes too much in his own head, but decent to the core. Never heard him raise his voice even when he'd have every right to. Had a colicky horse last spring, beast nearly took his arm off. Ben just talked to it soft and gentle until it calmed down. His father was different, Rebecca said, remembering Martha's comment. Mrs. Cooper's mouth tightened. Samuel Grant was a hard man who thought the only way to control anything was to break it first: horses, cattle, wives, sons. Ben grew up swearing he'd never be like that. Far as I've seen, he's kept that promise. When Ben returned for dinner, he seemed pleased to find the table set and a proper meal waiting, though he was careful to thank both women equally. He ate with the hearty appetite of a man who'd worked physically all day, but his manners were unexpectedly refined. Mrs. Cooper says you've had a busy day, he said to Rebecca, learning all the secrets of the house. Not all, Mrs. Cooper corrected with a smile. We've barely scratched the surface, but she's a quick study. Ben nodded, glancing at Rebecca. I hope it hasn't been overwhelming. Not at all, she assured him. It's good to be useful again. As promised, Ben made no demands on Rebecca's time that week. He went about his work, available to answer questions or engage in conversation during meals, but otherwise giving her space to settle in and consider her decision. Mrs. Cooper came 3 days as usual, and on the other days, Rebecca found herself gradually taking on small household tasks, not out of obligation, but from a desire to be productive. She met Hank, the grizzled old ranch hand who'd known Ben since childhood, and the 2 younger hands, brothers named Tom and Sam, who lived in the bunkhouse and looked at her with undisguised curiosity. All 3 men were respectful, if a bit awkward around her. On the 4th day, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Rebecca watched from the porch as Ben and the hands raced to secure everything before the deluge hit. When the rain came, it was with a violence she'd never witnessed in Boston, sheets of water driven by howling wind, lightning splitting the sky every few minutes. Ben returned drenched to the skin, leaving puddles on the floor as he removed his slicker and boots. "Sorry for the mess," he said, running a hand through his wet hair. Without thinking, Rebecca fetched a towel. "You're soaked through. You should change before you catch your death." He accepted the towel with a grateful nod. "The men are waiting out the worst of it in the barn." We got the horses settled just in time. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the kitchen in stark white light, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. Rebecca flinched involuntarily. "Not fond of storms?" Ben asked gently. She forced a smile. "They make me jumpy." "Me too, truth be told, too many close calls." He gestured to a scar along his forearm. "Lightning hit a tree I was standing under when I was 19, split it clean in 2. Another flash, another boom. This time, Rebecca couldn't suppress a small cry of alarm. Ben didn't comment, just moved to the stove. "Hot coffee helps," he said, setting a pot to boil. "So does distraction. Want to hear how I ended up with 42 head of cattle that aren't technically mine?" As the storm raged outside, Ben told her the complicated tale of a cattle drive gone wrong, a bankrupt buyer, and his eventual solution. His deep, steady voice washed over her, gradually easing her tension until she found herself laughing at his dry humor. "You're good at that," she said when he finished. "At stealing cattle?" he asked with mock innocence. "At calming frightened creatures," she replied, then blushed as she realized the implication of her words. Ben's expression grew serious. "Rebecca," he said the first time he'd used her given name, "I want you to know something. I understand fear. I've lived with it, breathed it, had it as a bedfellow for years. I would never intentionally cause it in another person." The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tight. "I believe you," she whispered, and was surprised to realize she meant it. That night the storm continued, rain lashing against her window. Rebecca woke from a nightmare of Harold's hands around her throat, his voice a roar of rage in her ears. Disoriented, she sat up in bed, heart pounding, before remembering where she was. Not fully awake, she slipped from her room and padded barefoot down the hall, seeking the security of her father's study as she had as a child. It wasn't until she was at the top of the stairs that reality reasserted itself. She wasn't in her childhood home. She was in Wyoming, in a stranger's house. "Rebecca," Ben's voice came softly from behind her. He stood in the doorway of his room, a lamp in one hand, wearing only trousers, his chest bare. "Are you all right?" Mortification flooded through her. "I'm sorry, bad dream, I forgot where I was." Instead of mocking her or showing irritation, he simply nodded. "Would you like some tea?" "I was awake anyway." They ended up in the kitchen, both in hastily donned robes, a pot of tea between them. Outside, the storm had gentled to a steady rain. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ben asked after a while. "The dream," Rebecca traced the rim of her cup. "Not particularly, fair enough." They sat in silence until Rebecca found herself speaking despite her intention not to. "It was about my husband, ex-husband, Harold." Ben's expression remained neutral, but she saw his knuckles whiten slightly as his hand tightened on his cup. "He wasn't always cruel," she continued, the words coming faster now. "When we were courting, he was charming, attentive. My father was impressed by his business acumen, but after the wedding—" She swallowed hard. It started with criticisms. Nothing was ever quite right: my appearance, my housekeeping, my conversation. Then came the shouting, then the first time he hit me. She couldn't look at Ben as she spoke, focusing instead on the rain-streaked window. I tried to be perfect, to anticipate his moods, to avoid triggering his temper. But there was always something, always a reason. "There's never a reason," Ben said quietly, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Not a valid one," Rebecca nodded. "I know that now. It took me too long to understand that nothing I could do would ever be enough because the problem was inside him, not me. When I finally realized that, I started planning my escape." She glanced up at him. "I'm sorry, this isn't appropriate conversation." "It's the most appropriate conversation two people considering marriage could have," Ben countered, "and I'm grateful for your honesty." He hesitated, then added, "My father was like your Harold. My mother endured it for 23 years until consumption took her. I swore I'd never become him, but I've always feared that his blood runs in my veins." "Is that why you've never married before?" He nodded. "Partly. Also because I wanted to make something of this place first, to have something worthy to offer." "The ranch is impressive," Rebecca said. "You've done well. It's getting there. Another few years, I think it could be something special." His eyes met hers across the table, something worth sharing with the right person. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility. "I should get back to bed," Rebecca said finally, though she was no longer tired. Ben stood when she did, always courteous. "Rebecca," he said as she reached the doorway, "whatever you decide at the end of the week, I'm glad you came here." She slept dreamlessly after that, waking to clear skies and renewed purpose. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving behind a glistening landscape and air that smelled of sage and wet earth. The fifth day brought an unexpected visitor, the local doctor making his rounds to the outlying ranches. Dr. Patterson was a jovial man with spectacles and a ready laugh, who took Rebecca's presence in stride. "So you're the brave soul considering taking on our Ben," he said as he examined a cut on Hank's hand. "Good luck to you both. This one needs civilizing." Ben rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Don't mind him. Patterson thinks everyone west of the Mississippi needs civilizing." "Only the ones who stitch themselves up with saddle thread," the doctor retorted, gesturing to a scar on Ben's forearm. After tending to minor injuries and dispensing advice about winter preparations, Dr. Patterson accepted Rebecca's offer of coffee. As they sat on the porch, he studied her with professional interest. "That bruise on your temple is healing well," he observed. "About 2 weeks old, I'd guess." Rebecca touched it self-consciously. "Yes." "I don't mean to pry," he said more gently, "but as the closest thing to a family doctor you'd have out here, I should know if there are any other injuries I should be concerned about." Rebecca glanced toward the barn where Ben was working. "Nothing recent, nothing that hasn't healed." The doctor nodded. "Good. Ben's a fine man, Miss O'Malley, one of the best I know. He's had his share of hardships, but he's never let them harden him. You've known him long, since he was a boy, treated him after his father's discipline, more times than I care to remember." The doctor's normally jovial expression darkened. Samuel Grant believed in ruling by fear. Ben's the opposite, believes respect has to be earned, not beaten into someone. Before Rebecca could respond, Ben approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're not telling tales on me, are you, Patterson?" "Only the flattering ones," the doctor assured him with a wink at Rebecca. That evening after dinner, Ben suggested a ride to show Rebecca more of the property before she made her decision. They set out on horseback, Rebecca on a gentle mare named Daisy, Ben on his rangy gelding. "I thought you might like to see the creek," he explained as they rode west from the house. "It's at its prettiest this time of year." The landscape opened before them, rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen, the distant mountains sharp against the sky. Ben pointed out landmarks as they rode, speaking with quiet pride about the land and his plans for it. The creek was indeed beautiful, a clear, rushing stream bordered by cottonwoods just beginning to turn golden. They dismounted, letting the horses drink while they walked along the bank. "I used to come here when I needed to escape," Ben said, skipping a stone across the water. After my mother died, especially my father, it was worse then. Rebecca watched his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. How did you bear it? He shrugged. Same way you did, I imagine. One day at a time, planning, waiting for my chance. He glanced at her. I left when I was 17, worked every job I could find, saving every penny. When my father died 6 years later, I came back to claim what was mine and remake it into something better. You've succeeded, she said sincerely. Ben turned to face her fully. Rebecca, tomorrow's your last day before you need to decide. I want you to know that I understand if this isn't what you want. Marriage to a stranger in a place far from everything familiar. It's a lot to ask. It is, she agreed. But staying in a place where I lived in constant fear wasn't an option either. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Whatever you decide, I want you to feel safe in that decision. If you stay, we'll take things as slowly as you need. If you go, I'll make sure you have what you need to start fresh somewhere else. The simple kindness of his words, the absence of pressure, the recognition of her agency moved Rebecca deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand, the first time she'd initiated contact between them. Thank you, she said softly. Ben looked down at their hands, then carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, turned his palm up to clasp her fingers gently in his. The warmth of his calloused hand around hers felt unexpectedly right. They rode back as the sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Rebecca found herself studying Ben as he rode beside her, the straight set of his shoulders, the quiet competence in his movements, the gentleness with which he handled his horse. She tried to imagine a life with him in this place, and was surprised to find the image didn't frighten her. That night, alone in her room, Rebecca sat by the window watching stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Tomorrow, she would give Ben her answer. Tonight, she needed to be honest with herself about what she wanted. Safety, yes, but more than that. She wanted purpose, work that mattered. Connection. Perhaps someday, if she was very fortunate, love, could she find those things here with this quiet, honorable man. Morning arrived with perfect clarity, both in the weather and in Rebecca's mind. She dressed carefully in her best dress, arranged her hair neatly, and went downstairs to find Ben already at the stove, making breakfast as he had that first morning. Good morning, he said, turning at her approach. Something in her expression must have given her away, because a look of uncertainty crossed his face. You've made your decision, Rebecca nodded, suddenly nervous despite her certainty. I have. Ben gestured for her to sit, then brought coffee to the table and sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. I'm listening. I would like to stay, she said simply, if you still want me to. The relief that washed over his features was unmistakable. I do, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Very much. I should be clear about what I can offer, Rebecca continued. I can be a partner to you in this work. I can keep your house, help with the accounts, support your efforts to build something here. I can offer loyalty and honesty. She took a deep breath. What I can't offer, at least not yet, is physical intimacy. I need time. Ben's expression remained steady. I understand, Rebecca. We can take as much time as you need. We'll be married in name, partners in work, and the rest. The rest can come when you're ready, if you're ever ready. And if I'm never ready, she asked, needing to be completely honest. Then we'll have a partnership and friendship that many marriages lack regardless, he said without hesitation. I won't lie and say I don't hope for more eventually, but I want you to feel safe above all else. The knot of tension Rebecca had been carrying loosened. Then yes, Benjamin Grant, I will marry you. They were married the following Sunday in the small church in Sweetwater Junction. The ceremony was simple. Attended by Mrs. Cooper, Hank, the Hands, Dr. Patterson, Martha Wilson, and a few others from town who had become curious about the mail-order bride who had actually decided to stay. Rebecca wore a blue dress that Martha had helped her alter, and Benjamin wore a new shirt with his best trousers. The preacher, a young man with an earnest manner, pronounced them husband and wife with obvious approval. There was a small celebration afterward at the general store with cake and punch and well wishes from the community. Throughout it all, Ben stayed close to Rebecca's side, attentive but not possessive, making sure she was comfortable with the attention. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Grant?" he asked as the gathering began to disperse. The name startled Rebecca not unpleasantly, but it would take getting used to. "Yes," she said, meaning it. "Let's go home." Life at the Double G quickly settled into a rhythm. True to his word, Ben gave Rebecca her own room, making no demands beyond those of partnership in running the ranch. They worked side by side during the day, taking meals together, gradually learning each other's habits and preferences. Rebecca discovered she had a talent for bookkeeping, organizing the ranch's accounts in a way that gave them a clearer picture of their financial situation. Ben, in turn, taught her about cattle, horses, and the cycles of ranch life. November brought the first heavy snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse. Rebecca stood at the window watching Ben, and the hands bring the remaining cattle closer to the barn, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "It's beautiful," she murmured when Ben came inside, stamping snow from his boots. "It is," he agreed, coming to stand beside her a respectful distance away. "Also dangerous if you're not prepared, but we're ready for this winter." His confidence warmed her. "Yes, we are." As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, they fell into the habit of spending evenings by the fire, Ben often whittling or repairing tack, Rebecca sewing or reading aloud from one of the books from his surprisingly extensive library. These quiet hours became precious to her, a time when conversation flowed more easily between them. One such evening in early December, as a blizzard howled outside, Ben looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Can I ask you something personal, Rebecca?" she said aside her sewing. "Of course." "How did you meet him, Harold?" Rebecca hadn't expected this question, but found she didn't mind it. "At a literary society meeting. He was educated, charming, seemed to value my opinions. We discussed Emerson and Thoreau." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He courted me properly, calls at home, walks in the park, theater outings. My father approved. Everyone thought it was a good match." Ben nodded, his eyes on his work. "When did it change?" "The day after the wedding." Rebecca's voice grew distant. "We were at breakfast. I spilled tea on the tablecloth, a simple accident. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with such cold disappointment. That night he criticized everything, how I spoke, how I moved, how I responded to him. The next morning I tried so hard to make everything perfect, but it wasn't enough." "It was never enough." Ben set the bridle aside, his expression pained. "I'm sorry. The first time he hit me was 3 weeks after the wedding. I dropped a vase, one his mother had given us. He backhanded me across the face, then apologized profusely, promised it would never happen again." She shook her head. "I believed him, I wanted to believe him, but it happened again and again." "How did you get away?" Ben asked softly, Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap. "Our housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, helped me. She'd seen the signs, tried to warn me subtly, one night after Harold had been particularly bad. She helped me pack a few things and took me to her sister's home. They hid me while I healed, helped me find the advertisement, loaned me money for postage." Her voice broke. "I never got to thank them properly." Without a word, Ben rose and came to sit beside her on the sofa, still maintaining a small distance. "We could write to them, let them know you're safe, only if you want to." The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her deeply. "I'd like that, though I worry Harold might intercept the letter." "We could send it through Dr. Patterson's colleague in Denver," Ben suggested. "Make it harder to trace." Rebecca nodded, touched by his understanding. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence as the fire crackled and the wind moaned around the eaves. After a while, Rebecca spoke again. "What about you? Have you ever been close to marriage before?" Ben smiled faintly. "Once. Her name was Sarah, daughter of a rancher over in Johnson County. We courted for almost a year, but then her family decided to move to California. She asked me to come along." He shrugged. "I couldn't leave this place. It's part of me." "Do you regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Not anymore," he said, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of trust, a recognition of growing feelings that neither was quite ready to name. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite their isolation. Ben surprised Rebecca by bringing home a small pine tree, which they decorated with strings of dried berries, paper ornaments, and a few precious glass baubles that had belonged to his mother. "It's not much compared to Boston Christmases, I imagine," he apologized as they finished. Rebecca surveyed their handiwork with genuine pleasure. "It's perfect, simple and honest like everything here." On Christmas Eve, a package arrived from town. Martha Wilson had held it for weeks, a response to a letter Ben had secretly sent in November. Inside was a small, elegant silver hairbrush and mirror set. "To replace what you had to leave behind," Ben explained as Rebecca unwrapped it, her eyes wide with surprise. "Ben, it's beautiful, but far too expensive. It's Christmas," he said simply, "and you deserve beautiful things." Rebecca had managed to knit him a scarf in secret moments, using wool she'd purchased from Martha. It wasn't as grand as his gift, but the pleasure on his face when he unwrapped it was unmistakable. "No one's made me anything by hand since my mother died," he said, running his fingers over the careful stitches. That night, as they sat by the fire drinking hot cider, Rebecca found herself studying her husband's profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar near his right eyebrow, the way his mouth curved up slightly at one corner when he was thinking all had become dear and familiar to her over the past months. "Penny for your thoughts," Ben said, catching her gaze. Rebecca smiled. "I was just thinking that I'm happy here, happier than I expected to be." His expression softened. "I'm glad." "I was also thinking," she continued, gathering her courage, "that I might like to move my things into your room, if the offer still stands." Ben set his cup down carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. "It stands, but only if you're sure, Rebecca. There's no rush." "I'm sure," she said softly. "I trust you, Ben, and I care for you deeply." Later that night, in the room that was now truly theirs, Ben proved himself as gentle and considerate as he had been in every other aspect of their life together. His touch was reverent, his patience infinite, and when Rebecca tensed at an unexpected memory, he simply held her, whispering reassurances until she relaxed again. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured against her hair. In the quiet aftermath, wrapped in the warmth of his embrace, Rebecca realized that for the first time in years she felt completely safe. Winter gave way to spring, bringing mud season, calving, and new growth. Rebecca threw herself into ranch work with enthusiasm, learning to ride better, helping with the garden, even assisting during calving when extra hands were needed. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, leaving her stronger than she'd ever been. Their partnership deepened both in work and in private. Ben was a patient teacher in all things, and Rebecca proved a quick study. Together, they began to implement improvements to the ranch: a new chicken coop, expanded garden beds, repairs to fences and outbuildings. In late April, as they rode the property checking fences, Ben pointed to a sheltered meadow near the creek. "I was thinking we might build a proper schoolhouse there someday, for our children and maybe others from nearby ranches." The casual mention of their children made Rebecca's heart skip. "That would be lovely," she said, trying to sound casual despite the emotion welling in her throat. Ben glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Too soon to think about that," Rebecca shook her head. "Not too soon, just unexpected, in a good way." His smile warmed her more than the spring sunshine. May brought a letter, the first response from Mrs. Finch, relayed through the complicated route they'd established. The housekeeper expressed profound relief to hear Rebecca was safe and happy, and shared news that made her blood run cold. Harold had indeed come looking for her, making inquiries at her father's house and throughout the neighborhood. "He won't find you," Ben assured her that night as she trembled in his arms, "and if by some miracle he did, he'd have to go through me to get to you." "I know," Rebecca said, pressing closer to his solid warmth. "I know." Summer arrived in a blaze of wildflowers and long, productive days. The ranch flourished under their combined care, and Ben often remarked that he'd accomplished more in the past year than in the 3 previous ones combined. "It's having the right partner," he told her as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Makes all the difference in the world. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible when she'd stepped off that stagecoach nearly a year ago. It does indeed. In July, Dr. Patterson confirmed what Rebecca had begun to suspect. They were expecting a child in early February. Ben's face when she told him was a study in wonder and joy. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his expression made the question almost unnecessary. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he said, gathering her carefully into his arms. I don't even have the words, Rebecca." As summer waned into fall, Rebecca's body began to change, and with it, her perspective on the world. Everything took on new significance as she imagined sharing it with their child. The changing seasons, the routines of ranch life, the stories and songs she remembered from her own childhood. Ben became even more protective, though never restrictively so. He made sure she rested when needed, took on more household tasks, and spent evenings reading books on childbirth and infant care that Dr. Patterson had loaned them. "You'll be a wonderful father," Rebecca told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the growing swell of her abdomen. "I hope so," he said, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. "I don't have the best example to follow." Rebecca turned to face him in the darkness. "You've spent your whole life choosing not to be like your father, Ben. That choice has shaped you into exactly the kind of man who will be an excellent father." He kissed her then, a kiss full of gratitude and love. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured against her lips. "I ask myself the same thing every day," she replied honestly. Autumn painted the landscape in russets and golds, then gave way to the first snows of winter. The ranch was well-prepared barns full of hay, storerooms stocked with preserves and supplies, cattle moved to sheltered pastures. As Christmas approached again, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From terrified escape to tentative hope to this deep, abiding happiness, it seemed almost like a dream. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, with a small tree and simple gifts. As they sat by the fire afterward, Rebecca's hands resting on her rounded belly, Ben brought out one last package. "This is for both of you," he said, placing it in her hands. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden cradle, small enough to sit beside their bed but sturdily built to last for years. "I've been working on it for months," Ben admitted as Rebecca ran her fingers over the smooth wood and intricate designs. "In the barn while you were napping. It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." The baby, a girl they named Elizabeth Martha Grant, arrived during a February blizzard, with Mrs. Cooper serving as midwife since the snow made it impossible for Dr. Patterson to reach them. After hours of labor, Rebecca finally held their daughter in her arms, exhausted but triumphant. "She's perfect," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at the tiny red-faced bundle. "Just like her mother." "Would you like to hold her?" Rebecca asked, seeing the longing in his eyes. The sight of her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny daughter with such infinite tenderness brought fresh tears to Rebecca's eyes. Ben looked up, caught her watching, and smiled a smile so full of love and wonder that it nearly took her breath away. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything," spring returned, bringing with it Elizabeth's first smiles and coos. The ranch thrived, with new calves in the pastures and seedlings in the garden. Ben and Rebecca settled into the rhythms of parenthood with the same partnership they brought to everything else. One warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Rebecca took Ben's free hand in hers. "I was thinking about the day I arrived here," she said. "How frightened I was, how I couldn't imagine ever feeling safe again." Ben squeezed her hand gently. "And now I know what real safety feels like," she said, meeting his clear blue eyes. "It's not just the absence of fear, it's the presence of love, respect, and trust. It's knowing that my voice is heard, that my feelings matter. That I'm valued not for what I can provide, but for who I am." You are everything to me, Ben said with quiet intensity. You and Elizabeth, more than this land, more than this ranch. You're my heart, Rebecca. She leaned against his shoulder, content beyond words. And you are mine. The sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. On the horizon, storm clouds gathered, another spring thunderstorm approaching. But Rebecca felt no apprehension, only peaceful anticipation of the evening ahead. Putting Elizabeth to bed, sitting by the fire with Ben, perhaps reading aloud from the new book that had arrived from Denver. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and joys: garden work, ranch chores, Elizabeth's morning smiles. The days would build one upon another into seasons, years, a lifetime together in this place they both cherished. Rebecca Grant, once a frightened mail-order bride fleeing abuse, had found not just safety but joy, purpose, and deep, abiding love with a man who had kept his promise never to raise his voice in anger, a man who had helped her find her own voice instead. As twilight deepened around them, Ben pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. Ready to head in before the rain starts, Rebecca nodded, rising to her feet. Yes, let's go inside, let's go home. Hand in hand, with their daughter nestled between them, they walked into the warm light of the house they had made into a home together.